Kraziness in the Kennel is shaping up to be the most significant recruiting weekend Gonzaga has had since Chet Holmgren was on campus.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Monday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Gametime, folks. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Well, a former Gonzaga walk-on found a new home in the transfer portal over the weekend. We'll discuss that to close out the show. But first, we got a lot more recruiting updates for you all in this 2026 class. We'll talk about a big-time reclassification and what that might mean for Gonzaga. Also, a player who's listed Gonzaga in his top 9, what that means for the team. And we also got a pair of visits that we're going to start the show off discussing, starting with Hale Brutus. Hale Brutus is a player in the 2026 class, a 6'5" wing, 4-star prospect who Gonzaga offered a scholarship to a couple of weeks ago, and has been reported over the weekend that Hale Brutus is officially taking a visit to Spokane and the Gonzaga Bulldogs the same weekend as Kraziness in the Kennel, October 3rd through 5th. So also the same weekend that longtime 2026 target Sam Funches, who is a 4-star center, 7-footer from Mississippi, same weekend that he will be visiting. So we now know there will be at least 2 high-profile, high-priority recruits on campus for Gonzaga at Kraziness in the Kennel. This is not a big shocker. Gonzaga has always used Kraziness in the Kennel as a big-time recruiting weekend. They've had Nick Menia was on campus a couple of times for Kraziness in the Kennel. Obviously, he did not end up coming to Gonzaga. He ended up going to Duke, surprising everybody. But Gonzaga also had Jalen Suggs and Chet Holmgren, and many other high-profile recruits have been on campus during Kraziness in the Kennel. It makes sense. September, October is a big time in terms of visits for high school recruits, and for Gonzaga, it's a great opportunity to get recruits on campus, get them to see the experience, to experience what the Kennel is like, as close to a game environment as you can, while without actually bringing them to campus during their their high school season. As a reminder, Sam Funches was actually supposed to visit last February, but did not because his team was still in the state playoffs. So again, October works really well for being a time when those basketball seasons have not started yet, but where fans can still, or recruits can still come out and experience kind of the as close to the Gonzaga experience as you're going to get without there being actual games. A little bit more on Hale Brutus, 4-star, 6'5" wing from Florida, the 116th ranked player in the 2026 class, according to 247 Sports. However, he is higher in the other major recruiting services. The recent update from On3/Rivals has Brutus at number 81 in the recruiting class, while ESPN has him 75th in their top 100 recruiting rankings. Brutus also has visits planned to St. Louis in the A10 conference on August 29th, and his hometown school, Florida State, the Seminoles, on September 19th. Brutus also has plenty of other offers on the table, including Houston, as well as Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Maryland, LSU, TCU, Penn State, Dayton, and South Florida, among a handful of others. Brutus is a big athletic wing, and it has been a huge emphasis for Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs on the recruiting trail, has been going after players who are big for their size or big for their position, have good positional size, and on wings. I mean, we've seen Sam Funches, the center prospect. We talked about him earlier. Gonzaga also is pursuing Kennel, one of the best point guards in the 2026 class, but pretty much everybody else they are going after is a wing. Most of them would be traditionally 3s. There are a couple guys who would be more traditionally 2s. And there's even a guy we're actually going to talk about in a second who's kind of a 4-3 hybrid, the way that Corey Kispert was, the way that Julian Strother was. But for the most part, Gonzaga's using their high school recruiting to try to bring athletic, mobile wings with versatility, guys who can guard multiple positions into the fold. And that's exactly who Hale Brutus is. He has the versatility defensively to guard 1s, 2s, and 3s. So that gives Gonzaga so much defensive flexibility if he comes to campus. He also has really improved as a three-point shooter. That's been the thing that has really boosted Brutus's stock from being a good do-it-all kind of 3-star, low 4-star caliber prospect of like, oh, he's not going to hurt you, but for a power conference program, he's probably not going to be a huge player, to now with the outside shot kind of developing and the athleticism continuing to show out as he has filled out and matured physically. He's starting to look more like a player that could be a real impact guy. And the Zags have said they feel he is underrated, ranked in this class. Gonzaga's rarely wrong about this. It's common for Gonzaga to pursue players who are not rated all that highly by the recruiting services. Braden Huff was a borderline top 100 prospect up until the very end of the recruiting cycle, and he has been a tremendous player for Gonzaga. Davis Fogel was outside the top 100 when the Zags got interested. He ended up rising all the way into the 30s in that 2025 class. Corey Kispert was outside the top 100. Julian Strother was barely a top 50 recruit. Like, Gonzaga finds guys that they think fit their system, that they think are maybe underappreciated by the recruiting services, and their ability to, I don't want to say guess, their ability to correctly identify those players is staggering. They're excellent at this. So if they believe that Hale Brutus is underrated in this class, they are probably right about that. Can they convince him to come to Spokane across the country and play for Gonzaga? That's the $1 million question. But right now, they're very active in trying to pursue these athletic wing types. Now, this next player we're going to talk about, also set to take a visit to Gonzaga, a different weekend. He's got a lot less distance to travel. Brutus is coming all the way across the country to come to Spokane in October. Ethan Harris is just coming up I-5 a little bit. Well, not even really up I-5. I guess he's going across the state east. Ethan Harris coming from Camas, Washington, just east of Vancouver, the southwest corner of the state. He's going to come out to Spokane August 29th through the 31st for his official visit to Spokane. Harris is a 4-star power forward, again from Camas, Washington, 6'9" big. We recently spoke about him because he had one of the biggest jumps in any recruiting class that I have ever seen in a few month period of time. From On3/Rivals, they had Harris 239th in the 2026 recruiting class. And then their updated rankings that came out last week, he was all the way up to number 65, a staggering jump for Ethan Harris, who's now a 4-star power forward prospect. 247 Sports still has him unranked, but they haven't updated their rankings recently. So it's possible the next time they do a refresh, we'll see him climb quite a bit in their recruiting rankings as well. Harris is not just visiting Gonzaga, although he does seem to have kind of honed in a little bit on the Pacific Northwest. He has a visit set 1 week after he visits Gonzaga. He will head down to Corvallis to visit Wayne Tinkle and Oregon State. He took a visit back in June to Boise State. That was his first official visit. And then in July, he took an official visit to Iowa, out to the Hawkeyes on July 27th. So that's kind of the lone Pacific Northwest program that Harris is involved with, because he's also got offers from UW, Virginia Tech, Colorado State, St. Louis, New Mexico, Eastern, Seattle, Idaho, both Montana schools. It does sound like, according to Max Mandel, who covers Gonzaga for 247 Sports, does sound like Harris is also going to visit UW, although a date has not been set there. But Boise State, Oregon State, Gonzaga, UW, Iowa feel like kind of the schools he's honed in on at this point. And for Harris, he's a 6'9" kind of stretch 4 type. He's a very good shooter. His outside shooting has really come along recently. Very athletic 4, can get it, play above the rim, is a solid rim protector. And again, his rankings changed because he was so dominant against other high schoolers in the Vancouver, Camas area, but hadn't gotten a chance to really to prove himself against other high caliber, the kinds of players who are typically on those summer circuits like Peach Jam and EYBL. And once he got a chance to compete against those guys and played well, his ranking just rocketed up. And that's not too surprising. It's hard to gauge a player's competition level, which is why these summer circuits are so valuable, because you get to see the best of the best compete against each other. And when players pop and play well in those events, they tend to get pretty meteoric rises in the rankings. So we'll see for Gonzaga what they kind of want to do with Harris. He's like I said, a 3-4 hybrid at 6'9". If he could play the 3, I think that'd be really valuable. He's a bouncy athlete. Again, he can contest shots at the rim. You watch some tapes of him. I mean, he's throwing down dunks where he's got his whole elbow above the rim, which is very rare and exciting for a player who still has some more maturing to do physically. He's also got a lot of lateral mobility, the kind of mobility that with some work on his footwork and things like that, he could be somebody capable of defending out on the perimeter, which Gonzaga has loved having those 4s who can also defend on the wing the way Ben Gregg could, the way Anton Watson could. Having a player like that who can also space the floor just adds so much versatility and value to your offense. And it's hard to not think that Harris would thrive in Gonzaga's setup if he wanted to come out to Spokane and play for this program. So right now, Gonzaga's visits are as follows. They have Harris coming to campus August 29th. They have both Sam Funches and Hale Brutus coming to campus October 3rd through 5th for Kraziness in the Kennel. They also have a few other 2026 prospects who are set to visit, although have not announced dates. One of them is the number 1 player in the class, Tyron Stokes, who is planning to visit but will not reveal the date as his family does not want to be crowded by people at airports when he does announce his visit. Ikenna Elozi, who listed Gonzaga in his top 8, has said he plans to visit. He's the 2nd-ranked point guard in that 2026 class. And then last but not least is Baba Oladotun. And you may be thinking, if you're an eagle eye listener, hey, I thought he was in the 2027 class. Well, let's talk about that. Because Baba Oladotun, the top-ranked player in the 2027 class last week, decided to reclassify to 2026. So we're going to talk about what that means for Gonzaga's pursuit of the 6'9" wing. All that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, have you ever decided at the last minute you want to head out to a ball game with your friends or your family? Maybe it's game day and you're suddenly deciding, it's way too nice out. I don't want to watch this game at home. I want to be out in the stands, drinking a beer, having a hot dog. That's exactly where Gametime comes in. It is the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets to any event without all the stress. And with the money that you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drink, merch, or even invite a bigger group of friends to come out with you. Gametime makes all of that possible. And prices on the app, they actually drop the closer it gets to first pitch. And they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear views from your seat, and a lowest price guarantee that takes all the worry out of buying. Gametime is also the official ticketing partner of Locked On MLB, which makes it easy to browse the app for an exciting upcoming MLB game. Or, if you're in Spokane, a minor league game. There's not a lot of Spokane summer nights to take advantage of still remaining, but this Friday the Indians host the Vancouver Canadians at Avista Stadium, and tickets down the first base line just $18 a piece, and they got tickets right behind the plate for just $31. So folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets by using Gametime. Download the Gametime app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. That's basically a buy one, get one for this Friday's minor league game. Folks, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download the Gametime app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're still talking recruiting here for Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs. We're still, in fact, talking 2026 recruiting targets for the Zags. We talked about a pair of players who have set official visits to Spokane in small forward Hale Brutus and power forward Ethan Harris. And now we're going to talk about the number 1 ranked player in the 2027 class who made a big-time decision last week. That is Baba Oladotun. We've spoken about him a handful of times, a 6'9" wing from Silver Spring, Maryland, who announced last week he is planning to reclassify and will instead start college basketball in the 26-27 season instead of the 27-28 season. So this upcoming year in high school will be his final season of high school hoops instead of playing 2 more years. This has been rumored for a while. It's also not uncommon. Pretty regularly, you'll see players who are at or near the top of their class rankings ultimately end up deciding to reclassify, take some extra classes, do some summer school work, graduate a year early, and start college basketball a year early. Cooper Flagg did it. I believe AJ Dibansa did it. If not, I know there's other very recent players who have made this decision to enter college basketball a year early. So not a surprise that Oladotun is deciding to do that. He was the number 1 ranked player in the 2027 class. Now, the major recruiting services have updated their 2026 class rankings to include Oladotun, and he's not quite as high, although the 2026 class is considered kind of weak at the top. So a lot of people thought that was part of the main reason that Oladotun is making this decision, is to kind of put himself at or near the top of a more an upcoming recruiting class, because it's not considered a particularly strong class. But Olatotun's size, he's really thin. He's very, very skinny. I think makes it a little bit harder to project him as one of the top players in this class, just because he's a full year plus behind his peers in terms of how he stacks up to them in that recruiting class. So 247 Sports has him 8th in the 2026 class, and On3/Rivals has him 6th. So he's still very highly regarded. He's still a 5-star prospect. He's still one of the best high school players in the country. Just instead of being the top rising junior, he's now just a top 10 rising senior. Still an outstanding player, still ahead of every other player Gonzaga's pursuing in the 2026 class, with the exception of Tyron Stokes, who we've talked about a handful of times, the 6'7", 245-pound high schooler who played for Team USA's U19 team at the FIBA World Cup this summer, who's being pursued very heavily by both Kentucky and Louisville, who's playing high school basketball at Notre Dame in California, the same high school as Dusty Stromer. Oladotun, like we mentioned, 6'9" wing from Silver Spring, Maryland. Incredibly gifted scorer and just fluid mover for his size. He moves really well with and without the basketball. Again, he needs to put on some weight. He needs to get stronger. The urgency for those things to happen has increased with him moving to a different recruiting class. He had a little bit more time, and I think was a little bit more projectable because of that. But now that he's going to start college a year early, it just means that those concerns are more likely to be present, because he will be competing against 22 and 23-year-olds when he's 17 as opposed to being 18. So we'll kind of see how that maturity physically kind of suits him, and it could end up being something that presents a little bit of a challenge for him when he gets to the collegiate level. But there's no debate about his talent. He's a phenomenal facilitator and playmaker in a way where, like, you could see a vision for him being effectively a 6'9" point forward type, where he can control the offense, command everything, make the right reads, make the right passes, know when to attack the rim, know when to take outside shots. Like, he's drawn a little bit of comparisons to Kevin Durant, and he's probably doesn't have that high level of a ceiling. And a lot of those comparisons are physically, just because he's similar height and similar build to Kevin Durant. But somebody who can kind of operate the offense in a way is just so rare at that size, and especially for his already to be as gifted athletically and from his fluidity at his age is incredibly impressive. And the teams have taken notice. He has offers from just about everybody: Kansas, Kentucky, hometown Maryland school, BYU, Arkansas, Indiana, Louisville, Michigan, Oregon, Texas, UCLA, Tennessee, Syracuse, Villanova, Virginia, USC. I'm not going to keep going, but the list goes on and on and on. He only has one visit scheduled, and that is to his hometown school of Maryland. Would be an incredible get for Buzz Williams and the Terps if they could keep him at home and bring one of the top players in that class to Maryland. But Gonzaga also on the mix, and reportedly he is planning to visit. Now, we do not know dates for his scheduled visit, but he has indicated it could be in October. And I wonder if he is seriously considering visiting the same time as Brutus and Funches and coming onto campus for Kraziness in the Kennel. If so, like I said, that would be one of the biggest, if not the biggest, potential recruiting weekend in Gonzaga basketball history. Obviously, it's hard to beat Chet and Jalen and those guys, but a class with 2 4-star players in Funches and Brutus and a 5-star top 10 caliber talent in Baba Oladotun could be one of the biggest recruiting weekends in the history of Gonzaga basketball. Last player to talk about here on the recruiting cycle is Luca Foster. Luca Foster was offered by Gonzaga about 3 weeks ago and recently revealed his top 9, which does include Gonzaga. The list is Gonzaga alongside Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan, Villanova, Virginia, Oklahoma, Pitt, and Georgetown. Foster has scheduled 6 visits. Gonzaga not among those 6 visits. Gonzaga, Pitt, and Oregon are the 3 schools on his top 9 where he has not scheduled a visit. The other 6 he either has visited or at least has scheduled a visit. There's indications that he may end up visiting all 9, so this does not mean that Gonzaga is like fully out. I would say that not being among the first 6 visits for a player is probably not a great sign, but that's with limited knowledge outside of the situation. Just from that specific piece of intel, probably not a great sign for Gonzaga, but that doesn't mean that Gonzaga cannot make a late push or that he's not extra interested and just hasn't actually scheduled the visit. Like, there's a lot of factors that could come into play here, but Foster, for what it's worth, 4-star, 6'5" small forward, playing at Link Academy in Missouri, a native, however, of Pennsylvania. So Pitt being in the mix kind of makes some sense in that space. 36th ranked player in the 2026 class per 247 Sports, and he is a shooter. This is the main thing, is he is a gifted offensive player. He shot 40+% from 3 on a high volume, even against the most elite competition that he has played on the summer circuit. He was still over 37%. This dude is a knockdown, lights out 3-point shooter. That is why Gonzaga is pursuing him. That is why anybody is pursuing him. He's more than just that. He does have elite offensive efficiency. He's a great scorer around the rim. He picks his moments well. He's developing athletically in a way where you could project him to be a high-level athlete at the Power 4 level. But more than anything else, he is a very, very good floor spacing wing who has some offensive upside and versatility to his game that make him very appealing across all of college basketball, which is why he's being pursued by so many great programs. He's also kind of a late riser, so his recruitment is kind of in the early stages, even earlier than some of his peers. So again, that's part of the reason I wouldn't rule Gonzaga out here. Anytime you end up on a top list, it's a good sign. But this is one where some other schools definitely have an advantage right now, but we've seen Gonzaga play catch up before, and we've seen them do it very successfully. So certainly wouldn't count them out on Foster just yet. Well, folks, a former Gonzaga walk-on is joining a mid-major team that has won 20 or more games every single season since 2009. We got more on this fun development to close out the show coming up in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we are closing out the show with a transfer portal update. Yes, the transfer portal's still out, still open, still a few players hanging out in there waiting to find where their next college basketball home is going to be. Among those players was former Gonzaga walk-on Graydon Lemke. Lemke joined Gonzaga last year as a walk-on from Las Vegas, and now he is committed to join the Belmont Bruins in the Missouri Valley Conference. And this is not a big shocker. Graydon Lemke on his Instagram profile for a while now had Belmont listed in his bio, and I'd reached out to kind of see if, hey, is this an official thing? Is this happening? And looked at Belmont's roster, and it hadn't been updated, and I never ended up hearing back from Graydon until this was announced late last week. But again, something that had seemingly been in the works for a while. Lemke was a unique walk-on in the sense that he wasn't just like this kid happened to be on campus and looked good on some practices or on some runs in the fitness center, so now we're going to add him to the roster. Like, Lemke was a recruited walk-on. He was a preferred walk-on. He was a guy that 6'10", which already by itself makes him unique for a walk-on. That is very, very rare, and a guy who was highly regarded in high school at times, but dealt with injuries at inconvenient times and never really got to push himself to having like a 3 or 4-star status out of high school. So he didn't get a lot of recruiting offers, didn't get a lot of attention. Gonzaga brought him on as kind of a big man project to kind of see if they could make anything out of him. And he spent all of last year in the weight room, apparently, according to him and according to other reports. He went from being 190 pounds when he got to campus in Spokane to leaving at 235 pounds. And you've seen some pictures of him that he's posted recently, and he I believe it. He looks like he's a lot stronger. He's filled out physically. Again, a lot of people just grow a lot between 18 and 19 years old. So that combined with being on a collegiate weight room and being in a collegiate weight training program and diet and all that has really helped him fill out in a way where he's absolutely somebody who could help and who could contribute. And, I was very interested to follow his recruiting kind of process in the transfer portal because we don't see this happen very often. And last year, Colby Brooks was a walk-on who left Gonzaga and entered the transfer portal. He ended up going to San Diego and played a decent role for them. Played I think 8 to 10 minutes per game. Even started a few games for them. So I was kind of curious, what's Lemke going to do? Is he going to end up getting a similar opportunity? And early in the transfer portal window, he was contacted by Minnesota, which would have been very cool to see him end up in the Big Ten. Contacted by Northern Arizona and former Zag Gary Bell, who's a coach over there. A few other programs gave him some attention, but now he ends up at a Belmont program that, like I said, has won 20 or more games every year since 2009. They've been very competitive during that time. Casey Alexander's been their head coach for a while, and they haven't made the tournament under Alexander, but they've won 22 or more games every single year. Third transfer portal addition for them, joining Nick McLean from Eastern Washington. So two guys coming from the Spokane area, heading out to Belmont, which is out in Nashville. Isaiah West from Samford, the other addition for Belmont. The Bruins 110th in Bart Torvik's preseason rankings, so a pretty solid program, and I'm very excited to see how much of a role Lemke ends up having for them with 4 years of eligibility remaining as a redshirt from last year. He joins a growing group of players who have transferred from Gonzaga who will play across college basketball this upcoming season. Lemke is one of 7 Zags who have entered the transfer portal. 6 of them have found new homes. The one who has not remains Colby Brooks. Brooks, who, as I mentioned, transferred to San Diego last year, has entered the transfer portal from San Diego, but has not found a new landing spot for what I believe will be his final season of eligibility. So we'll keep an eye on where Brooks ends up. But the other players, of course, Dusty Stromer hit the transfer portal early this offseason and landed at Grand Canyon in what eventually became a trade, effectively, as Stromer goes to GCU and Tyon Grant Foster comes over to Gonzaga. Michael Ajayi hit the transfer portal, landed in the Big East with the Butler Bulldogs. Jun-Suk Yo hit the transfer portal after a couple of seasons at Gonzaga, where he just never really found a consistent role in Gonzaga's rotation. He stays in the WCC and joins Seattle U as the Redhawks bring him on campus. Again, very excited that we'll get to compete against June twice this year when Gonzaga plays Seattle U. Dominic Harris is now on his 4th different school. He started at Gonzaga, spent a year at LMU, spent a year at UCLA, and will now transfer to Loyola Chicago in the Atlantic 10 Conference and will play for the Ramblers for his final season of eligibility. And then Pavle Stosic, who started at Gonzaga, played just 14 games for the Zags, transferred to Utah State last year, but redshirted, so he's only ever played for Gonzaga, but he transferred after a year at Utah State and is now back in the WCC as well to play for the Pepperdine Waves. So Gonzaga will get a crack at 2 of these guys. We'll see if they get a crack at a third one in Colby Brooks. And, of course, you never know what could happen with the NCAA tournament and Grand Canyon, Butler, maybe even Loyola Chicago sneaking into the dance and giving the Zags a chance to play some more former players. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. I always want to give a special shout out to those everyday listeners and those of you hanging out in the Locked On Zags Discord community. Reminder to hit that bell button on YouTube if you're watching there so you can get subscribed and notified every time there is a new show. Got some fun stuff planned for you all this week. Got an interview lined up. We'll keep you up to date on any more recruiting updates as they come out as well. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And of course, as always, go Zags.